Howdy folks, this is John. Someone asked me, how do you go about starting a garden? And that made me think about how do you go about it if you're starting from scratch and you don't really know much about growing things at all. The first thing you want to do, assuming you have a place that you could potentially use, is make sure that the environment is good enough. You need to have 6 to 8 hours of direct sun, even if it's scattered throughout the day, for most vegetable plants to grow. Some will take a little less sun, like these blackberries and raspberries. They can deal with a little less intensity of sun. You got to kind of look at the natural state of the plant, or in the case of most plants, the ancestors, the wild ancestors of the plants we use, and what do they need? And then we need to kind of replicate that. For most plants, that's going to be 6 to 8 hours of good direct sun throughout the day. You also need to have soil that has a little bit of richness to it. If it doesn't have the richness, you can build it up. But you're not going to know what you're going to need to add until you have a soil test done. And I suggest a professional soil test. It costs a lot, yes. But you get one soil test done the first year, you're going to know what additives need to be put in to get to a soil fertility level that most vegetables will be able to prosper and thrive in. And that way you're not running around wasting money on things that you don't need and may have an excess of. For instance, my soil is very excessively high in magnesium. So the last thing I need to add is something like sulfomag or Epsom salts. Everybody always recommends use Epsom salts. Well, I do not need more magnesium. All I needed was some very inexpensive gypsum that would latch on to the molecules on the soil, knock off the magnesium, and replace it with calcium. And we were low in calcium, so this finished 2 things for us. So it's one of those things where you need to know where you're at in the first place. The soil is like a bank account. If you don't know the balance, you don't know what kind of checks you can write. So you got to check that first. Then you should also do a little research on things. Learn a little bit about the biology and life cycles of the particular plants that you would like to grow, and if they would even grow well in your area. If you have farms near you, what kind of things do they grow? I'm in a strawberry broccoli growing area very near me. That means I could probably grow strawberries and broccoli for much of the year here. But it's not a place for corn. Corn requires a lot of water, a huge amount of water. And that's another thing you need to consider is what are you going to eat? Only try to grow what you're going to eat that is much better that you can grow than what's in the store. And in general, corn is one of those things I recommend against. It's hard to beat the flavor of fresh grown corn just picked from the garden. It takes so much space. It's such a high feed requirement. You can get so much more value in potatoes and squash and tomatoes than you can with corn. And you can get the corn for a fair, decent price at the store. But now we're back to another thing, is the economics of it all. See, a lot of people are going to be growing now because of scarcity, irregular supplies at their stores, and especially high prices. You don't need to be paying $100 per head of broccoli to save money. What you need to do is figure out how to make your natural fertility of your soil come out and be available to the plants. Because most soils have the fertility that most plants need. Most soils are going to be lacking in 1, 2, 3 elements that would be very good for you to know about. But the rest you're not going to need to worry about adding to the soil. You need to worry about how to get the soil to release those and make them available to the plants. Hold on one sec, let me let the dog out. So the soil's biology is what unlocks and makes available to the plants many of the nutrients. And that's done through the microbes, the fungi, a whole myriad, a world of little creatures that live in the soil. And as they're going about their business, their excretia and secretions, much of that is what the plants take up. So you just need to make that available. So your best bet starting off, once you've determined a place, is get some mulch over the top. You can use wood, you can use any material that you can find. You need to build up the biology of the soil. You need to give the soil a blanket of protection so that the natural fertility of the soil can be unlocked by those microbes. So put a heavy mulch down, get wood chips, straw, any natural material that is going to shade the ground so it is not getting bombarded by the solar rays. So now you go ahead and you've got your soil set in there, you've got your soil fertility tests maybe looking into getting done. The first things you ought to plant is something that's easy, fast results, and near foolproof. So I would recommend squashes. Don't get a huge number of them. Get 2 or 3 seed packets of squash, of different squash types, plants that you like, and plant 2 seeds of each in their own little pot or direct in the soil if you want to do it that way. And let those grow and learn how to gauge the health of a plant, because those have very expressive leaves. If it's a hot day and the soil is a bit dry, you're going to look at those plants and you're going to be able to recognize by those wilted leaves that they need some water. They are going to be a very good instructive device for you. And you're going to learn a little bit about the biology, life cycle of flowers, the pollination that happens, the fact that some plants will have male and female flowers, and you learn to tell the difference on the squashes. And also try tomatoes. Tomatoes are said to be the #1 crop that U.S. gardeners love, and I do too. So you go ahead and get yourself 1, 2, 3 tomato plants. I would recommend starting them from growing plants already. And read up a little bit on the difference between determinate and indeterminate. Determinate has a growth habit that is determined by its genetics. It's only going to get 2 feet tall, 3 feet, 4 feet tall, whatever it is for that particular variety. Indeterminate has a growth habit that is determined by the winter. In other words, it can keep growing until frost hits it. And it can grow into a very long vine. And those are pruned a little different, because a long vine, you prune it as a long vine in general, or as several vines growing along. But the 2-3 foot one, they're usually kind of just allowed to grow into a big bushy thing, and those are the ones that you can use tomato cages for. It's easy to learn the difference on these, but I would get one of each if you can. Go ahead and play with both. And the thing of it is, tomatoes are one of those plants that once you've got tomatoes coming in, if you've got 2 or 3 plants, you're going to have enough tomatoes from that point on to get you by with tomatoes. So you got squash, you got tomatoes, you can try cucumbers. Those are easy to grow from seed. I would recommend you put them direct in the ground. they don't like to be transplanted too much. And if you've never transplanted anything, put it direct in the ground. So in that case, you figure out where you want to have the cucumbers grow up. If you've got a fence or some sort of a wire that you can train it up. So as the little vines grow, you just weave them in through the wires, and that way your cucumber will hang straight down and you'll have a nice cucumber without it being yellow on one side. It'll be green all around and look really nice. That's what people like. You got squash, you got tomatoes, you got cucumbers. And that kind of rounds things out pretty good. But let's add potatoes. Potatoes are a pretty darn good plant to grow. You can just take the ones that sprout in the cupboard and go ahead and stick them under straw mulch. Just set them direct on the ground in a spot where you can water easy enough, and put 6 inches of straw over them. And the potatoes that they grow will mostly be right on top of the soil, and you'll be able to pull the mulch back and pull out new potatoes without having to take the whole thing up. And that's a very quick, efficient way to grow potatoes so that you always have them. Now you got sunflowers. Sunflowers are a really beautiful, spectacular plant. They're kind of a pain in the butt to do the drying and everything, but if you get the drying process correct, it's fun having a lot of sunflower seeds, and they're fun to roast as a family adventure and treat. That's always lots of fun. Same like roasting pumpkin seeds. So go ahead and try those, but be aware that they also take up a lot of nutrients. They're a big plant. That great big giant stem is like a big club. And if you go for the mammoth types, you might wind up with an 8-foot tall, 10-foot tall stalk. So make sure that you don't plant it under the eaves and have it bothering you that way and giving you consternation and cause for worry. Now you got perennials. Actually, I think perennials are one of the best things that you can plant. They are going to usually take up a little bit more effort to put in the ground in the first place. But once they're in, they're pretty easy to take care of. They just need regular watering on whatever schedule. They're going to need a little bit of fertilization. But if you've got a lot of mulch around your plants, that is slowly over the years going to release elements and nutrients into the soil. It will also tend to even out pH ranges that are outside of kind of neutral. So you're going to have so very little effort to have to put into something like raspberries and blackberries, asparagus, and fruit trees. So I recommend, if you've got the space, put those in. And those are a long-term investment. And you have to remember also that in the case of most of those perennials, you're not going to get anything for a couple of years in most cases. And in case of grapes and fruit trees, it might be 4 or 5 years. So that's going to be a long-term investment, but it's worth doing, because once it's there, you've got a plant that can yield a huge amount of food for a long time through different parts of the year, all depending on the variety and species of what you got. You got things like artichoke. If you've got the space and you like the plant, if you think it's a nice looking plant in your garden, if you like to eat artichokes, you definitely ought to grow some artichokes. Now that brings us back to the very first thing we were talking about here, which is attitude. This is Agriculture is a process that's been ongoing for 10,000 years. We've been trying to learn it all of that time. And there's still lots and lots of new discoveries and learnings that are coming about. And we cannot learn these things if we are blinded, if we have a misguided notion that this is the only way things can be done. So what you have to do is come to terms with the fact that the gardening community is a community of gardeners. And we all learn from one another, and we all need one another to revitalize our own attitude, much like adding new compost to old potting soil can revitalize that soil. You need that contact. You need to have gardeners that you know. You need to have an artichoke plant that's putting out little babies from the bottom, and you pot those little things up, and you got them sitting there, and then when you meet somebody that you know that gardens, and they've got some raspberries, you could trade plants. You can trade produce. If you grow by accident a dozen squash plants and you can't bear to take them out and you've got the space to let them live, you're going to have a lot of squashes. And if you don't harvest them, they're going to grow into great big giant clubs. So you're going to have to harvest them and either throw them away and feel horrible about it. Even if you're composting them, it's still throwing them away. This is not the sort of thing you want going on. So what you got to do is get together with people around you that have similar food and growing interests and trade plants and trade produce at times. Go ahead and get rid of some of your squashes, and you never know when someone will bring a basket of raspberries by your house. So folks, get a garden going. As soon as you've got a spot scoped out for it, stick mulch on the ground and get it in deep while you learn things and while you plan and while you get ready to grow. And anytime you want to plant something, you just run on out there and you dig around in that mulch, move it aside and stick that plant into the ground with a couple handfuls of compost, and make sure you can get water to it when it needs it. But learn to garden, learn to grow things, and learn that you can garden easily if you just put a mulch on the ground and let the ground condition itself through its own biology. Well, thank you much, folks, for watching. Go ahead and like and subscribe and share this with your friends that need to learn about gardening. We'll see you around now. Bye.